Welcome wherever you are in the world. I was supposed to be doing this live. It's now Thursday. I was supposed to be doing it on Friday evening, which is tomorrow. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I've got to work. I've got to set up a crime scene as a corporate team build for 30 odd people in Nottingham. So just to bring you up to date, my name's Steve Gaskin. As most of you know, I was formerly a DCI in the Metropolitan Police Service, Scotland Yard in London. And subsequent to that, I've been a criminal psychologist. So my job is to talk about true crime. These days, I do quite a lot of after dinner speaking, conference speaking, and of late, I've done a lot of TV work. Sounds quite arrogant, this does, but did a very, very interesting program on Channel 5 called Wayne Couzens, Killer in Plain Sight. And that went live a couple of weeks ago. So if you want to watch that, you can go onto Channel 5 and have a look. But more about today. I'm really, really excited to deliver this. It's over 4 hours, 2 hours today. It might not take you that long, but it took me 2 hours to deliver when I did this live a few months ago. And then what we're going to do is have a break for a month, and then I'm going to put this and then next month's one up on YouTube and give you the reference for that. But as always, it's free. And some of you know lots about the police service, some of you don't. It's going through a difficult time at the moment. But for me, the police service put me through a number of different courses, and I think they must have spent about £100,000 at least on my education. So the reason why I do criminal and forensic psychology activities or addicts is really just that sort of pay it forward or giving a bit back. That sounds quite trite, doesn't it? But it's absolutely true. So we'll go through that, and we do this. So we do some online stuff, but more importantly, we've started doing quite a lot of live events in London. And right at the end of this, I want to talk to you about a live event that we're doing on the 6th, 7th and 8th. We're repeating it each day in London. But let's get on with this. For me, really, this is I'm going to share my screen. In the second part of this, there's quite a lot of things to do, as there are here. And I'm even going to set you a bit of homework, which I'm not going to mark, of course. It's just around some Freudian things. But for me, this is, when we talk about true crime, we think of Harold Shipman, we think of all the things in the States. Over here, there's a particular trial going on of a nurse. But I think sometimes we forget that there are people like Mao Zedong, Joe Stalin, who was our ally in the Second World War, and most importantly, Adolf Hitler, which we're going to talk about. I've actually done more research, would you believe, on this topic than any other. So let's just get on with it. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm really looking forward to doing this with you. With this, there has to come a copyright notice, and that is, this must not be shared. I don't mind if you want to share this, but it certainly mustn't be copied, because this is a commercial product. I use it in schools and everything, and obviously if it's copied, it takes away my livelihood, which I'm sure you wouldn't want to do. So there's just a copyright notice there. So let's have a look and see where we are going to go with this. First thing is, a big question there. How was it that a single man was able to influence so many people and yet kill millions? So it's welcome, that's probably not the right word, to inside or in the mind of Adolf Hitler. I want you to have a look at this definition, a demagogue. to be honest with you, sometimes I get a new word and people start referring to words and I think, what on earth are they talking about? But I think this aptly sums up what we're about to encounter. So a demagogue is a political leader who seeks support by appealing to the desires and prejudices of ordinary people rather than by using rational argument, which is exactly what Hitler did. He appealed to the desires. At the time he came to power, he was Chancellor of Germany in 1933, and they were going through a really bad economic time. So there was the desire to have someone, A, put the country back together, and secondly, to get the economics back on track. And holistically, I've read hugely about Hitler, and he actually used some very good economics to get the country back on. And of course, counted against that is the prejudices of ordinary people, and that is that Hitler brought in. It wasn't just the Jews. It wasn't just the Jews. Hitler didn't stop there because it was people with disabilities. It was travellers. At the time, they were called gypsies. But had he won the war, he would have then started going a lot further because he wanted this pure Aryan race. And also he wanted to land grab. And if you look at most wars, you think they're about politics, they're about hatred. But if you actually stop and listen, a lot of wars are actually about land grabbing, as was the Second World War. There you see Adolf Hitler, and I've done not a caricature, but on the left-hand side there, you can see in his mind. And we're going to have a really good look at that. The 4 sessions, and there's going to be 2 today, is the background of Adolf Hitler. What was his upbringing? There's no thoroughly reliable information, and I've really sort of beavered away by reading as much material as I could around this subject, because it's important as budding psychologists or psychologists. We want to know about this information. Secondly, what can we glean from his early years background? And we're going to look at this thing called a Messiah complex, just so you're aware of that. And we're going to move on to, and I'm really, really excited about this for giving value. And of course, I don't charge for you guys, but the Secret Wartime report, too. Like a lot of us during the lockdown, I was thinking to myself, what can I do? And it was this that I got into. But there were some secret wartime reports which were held, as the title suggests, in secrecy. So I couldn't access them. But the good news is during the lockdown, some papers from Cambridge University became available to me, and most importantly, from the United States of America. I'm going to give you access to both of these, and I'm really excited about it. And there's a book by a guy, a psychologist called Walter Langer, and his family very graciously have given me the opportunity to hand out, completely free of charge, ebooks. So you've got Steve Gaskin for 4 hours, and if you're interested in this, there's a shed load of stuff that you can start applying yourself. How accurate were the wartime reports? You know, some of you have heard me do offender profiling, but unless offender profiling actually brings something to the police, it's a complete and utter waste of time. Why were the secret papers kept secret for so long? And that's really, really interesting. And then in the second half, which is going to be next month, and I'm hoping to do that live, we're going to look at, was he mad? Was he bad? Or was he evil? And what is the difference between the three? And what do the mental illness measurements tell us? And I'm going to invite you to do some screening on Adolf Hitler to see what sort of person he was. I first tried this when I was on a lecture series at Marlborough College Summer School last year, and it worked really well. And then finally, we're going to look at psychological assessment and reconstruction and the conclusion. What type of man would he, and how accurate were the conclusions and predictions of psychoanalysts? And just for completeness there, you can see that this is just top or an introduction to the some portion of secret papers, which you're going to get full access to. Where often when you do an academic essay, you say what you're not going to cover. Well, I'm not going to be covering this. I'm not going to look at it for 4 hours, but I'm not going to cover this. What was his performance like? What was his sort of military prowess or performance in World War One? I'm going to touch on that because he did get the Iron Cross, and that's not given away freely. And I might touch on that. How was his rise to total power so meteoric? Although we're going to touch on that again. And what was his relationship like with women? His military prowess as Führer. We're not going to deal with that. This is the added value. Interaction. You can watch this with a friend. You can you can do whatever you like with it. But certainly in the second half, the parts 3 and 4. Just to remind you, we're doing parts 1 and 2 today. It's not a lecture. So, and the good news with this being on YouTube is you can stop and start it any time you like. So, after the experience, the book that you can look at from Walter copy of the Secret Psychological Assessment of Adolf Hitler's Speeches. And that actually is a really interesting part of true crime that we are all interested in. There's emerging evidence that for criminals that are lying, instead of hooking them up to a polygraph or a lie detector, the analysis of speech is becoming more and more accurate. And this guy, really going back to when Hitler was in power, did quite a good job of analysing his speeches. And maybe, I don't know, we might even have a whole session on around lying in the context of true crime. I'm going to provide you with some dark triad assessment tools, more about that later. Assessment. Some of you have done that with me, which is good. And all of these resources can be found via the crimelab.co.uk resources. But what I am going to do is I've got to travel to Nottingham shortly, but following this gig, what I am going to do is to make sure that all of those resources that I promised you are going to be sitting at the top of this part of our website. Into it. Sorry, there was a bit of a, again, you can cut some of this out if you want, but let's look at the background. And what I've got, start off with the quiz here, just to get you into the thinking. So what year was Hitler born? What religion was Hitler's paternal grandfather? He wrote a book called Mein Kampf. This translates to, in English, one of those three. How old was Eva Braun, his girlfriend, when they met in 1929? And how old was Hitler when he took his own life? And what you can do is on the next slide, it will give you the answers. But do you know, one of the things that I have to applaud modern day Germany for is that in preparation for today, along with the reading that I've done, is I actually went over to Germany and did some research. And I've got to say that the Germans, and it's I prefer to talk to the people that were committing all these atrocities in the Second World War. I prefer to call them Nazis, yeah, and not Germans. That's just me. But the German people have dealt with, in my opinion, the whole of the Hitler thing, his ideals and everything, in an extremely sensitive fashion. For instance, the place where Hitler took his own life, the bunker, I've been there. Of course, it's all been filled in. And on the top is a children's playground. So it's that sort of thing. It's acknowledged. You know, we do have these people, I forget the terminology, that suggest that the Holocaust didn't take place. Well, it did. There's no doubt about that. And then on top of everything else, so I've done book research in Germany, and I've also fairly recently been to Auschwitz in Krakow in Poland. Oh, here is the so you're hearing me talking. You can spend some time with this, and I'm going to pause just for a few seconds. And here are the results. So you can see that. That is to get you into the thinking. Let's go into the background of Adolf Hitler. And I've said before, and I will say it again, it's very, very dangerous to look at modern day serial killers and say, okay, let's have a delve back into that person's past and try and find and isolate the trigger that's caused that person's ability to go out and commit serial murder or serious sexual offences. That is a very dangerous way of setting about things because often there is no trigger. So you just need to be a bit careful of that. Having said that, let's have a look. You can see that Adolf Hitler there was born on the 20th of April, 1889. And there's a picture of him in August 1914. And this is just before he went into the German army in the First World War. The research that I've done, if you go to that, he was one of these people when he joined the army that he tried to be an over pleaser, so over exuberant by volunteering for loads and loads of things. So very, very extrovert. And you can see there as little in 1921, he's got 6,000 people there. And we're going to look at his rise and who he took counsel from to bring him up to the fantastic orator that he was. November 1923, he tries to seize power and in Munich, and that was known as the Beer Hall Putsch, and it was a complete and utter failure. What he tried to do was to secure the assistance of a German general, but the whole thing was a complete and utter disaster. And Hermann Goering, who had been a World War I fighter ace, was injured during that. He was shot in the groin, and that particular person, Goering, went on to be an addict, a drug addict, because of the pain that he was in. So one of Hitler's inner sanctum cabinet, you got someone that was a drug addict. 1925, and that's whilst he was in prison, because it was possible that when he was tried for treason, it was just possible that he could have been executed for that, but he wasn't. The judges were clearly sympathetic and empathetic, and they took a very lean view as to what should happen to Hitler for treason. And whilst he was in prison, he wrote this book called Mein Kampf, which translates to My Struggle. In 1929, he meets Eva Braun, age 17. And you may think, I don't know what it was like with distances in age between relationships, but you're talking about a very, very young woman here that he meets when she's aged just 17. And in January 1933, he becomes the Chancellor of Germany, not the president. At the time, the presidentship was held by someone else. And when he died, because of what was going on and the lies that Hitler told, he fused the two together. So not only was he the Chancellor, but he was also the president, and he had ultimate power at this point. And you can see there on the 30th of April, 1945, aged 56, he's dead. Yeah, he's dead. Takes his own life. So again, let's just have a look at the background here. And this is really important because often when you're talking about a subject, no matter what it is, you've got to contextualize it and put it into context. So you can see Hitler's father, Adolf, was illegitimate, and he was the son of Maria Schickel-Gruber, which there's nothing funny about this at all, but had they not changed the name to Hitler, the Nazis at the time would have been saying Heil Schickelgruber, which would have been quite perverse, really. So 35 years after the death of his mother, he adopted the name Hitler, and he was the fifth child. So well down the kind of pecking order. Hitler feared and opposed his father. He gave all his affections to his mother, who died in 1908 of cancer. And Adolf Hitler was stricken with grief. And along the line, somewhere along the line, in preparation for what I'm delivering now, I discovered that the guy the doctor that attended his mother was Jewish. He was an Orthodox Jew, and Hitler had this man spirited out of the country personally to Switzerland, so he was not going to be part of the Holocaust. But that gives you really an idea of what the relationship was like between Hitler and his mother. Well, at school, some of us know what that feels like. Mother sent him to Vienna to complete his art studies. There's no doubt about it that he was what I call an angry artist. And I don't know about you guys, I'm a terrible artist. But sometimes people, if they can't draw, if they can't paint, they can't produce architecture, it does send them on a kind of downward spiral and they get quite angry. So he failed the art exam, which barred him from architectural school. That's what he wanted to do. He fell into some difficult ways and he lived as a beggar, living in poor accommodation and drifting from low-paid work. And I saw that he was one of the things that he was doing was painting postcards and selling those to tourists at the time. It was here that he began to crystallize his ideas about anti-Semitism and anti-Slav. And one wonders if you're in that condition or you're in a low ebb, age 19, when he was a beggar, you want something to think about. And this is where his ideas were born. In 1912, he moved to Munich, where he carved out his career as a watercolor artist. And in 1914, and we don't really know why he joined the army, but he enlists in the army. I suppose he was caught up with the fervour of that war, and with great enthusiasm, as I've discussed, and he was awarded an Iron Cross. Yeah, for bravery. Early observation. He was frail and sickly, emotionally dependent on his mother. Some commentators have even suggested an Oedipus complex, while others say, on the other side of the coin, he hated his mother. So an Oedipus complex, just to get that home, is where you actually fall in love with your mother. You go further than the bounds of ordinary non-sexual love. You go over that boundary. Never did any manual work. He did not engage in any athletics or any sport. He was turned down as forever fit for conscription into the Austrian army. But let's not forget that Hitler was born in Austria and he was an Austrian, not a German. It wasn't until later that he had to get German citizenship in order for him to move up the scale with his politics. So he was afraid of his father. His behaviour was outwardly submissive, and later he was annoyingly subservient to his superior officers. Emotional collapses, nightmares. Later, was that a poor conscience because of what he'd done? Long spells of lack of energy, confidence and decision making, which I find remarkable, really, particularly when he was the Chancellor. He was waging war against Poland to start off with, and then the rest of Europe. Lack of energy, confidence, and decision making. You know, and if you look at what we had with Winston Churchill, it's the opposite, isn't it? He was full of energy, full of confidence, and his decision making, so I've read, was par excellence. He derived from, this is stuff I've read, it's not my terminology, derived from peasant stock, which he hated. And of course, before Germany was a united country, there were lots of little states, and there were people from all walks of life. And right at the bottom were peasant stock, and he hated this. So one wonders whether his drive, his upward drive, were for two things: is first of all to try and put behind him his past, and secondly, to please his dead mother. Illegitimate father, his illegitimate father married 3 times, and this is interesting. From what I've read, there's no doubt about this. His ancestry was almost certainly Jewish. And I believe from the reading that I've done that this chap was impotent. And that actually accounts for lots of things that I'm about to talk to you about. So here we go, and I'm not going to go into a historical diatribe, but we know of Versailles on the 28th of June 1919, which is after the conclusion of the First World War. The Americans, the British, and the French sat down together and came up with this Treaty of Versailles. And at the time, it looked good because it was all about reparations for war damage. So the Germans were fined an absolute fortune in gold marks, as it was there. They weren't allowed to have an army over 100,000 people. They couldn't build ships. They couldn't build military ships or anything to do with that. And they had to give away a lot of timber and coal. It was over punitive. So whilst it looked like a right and fitting punishment, the Treaty of Versailles, in my opinion, actually stimulated the Second World War. But after the war, as like a lot of men, he had nowhere to go. So he had been, so far as he's concerned, he'd been victorious. He'd got an Iron Cross, but he had nowhere to go. He wasn't trained. So what he looked at, how could he continue what he was doing from a soldier, and he became an espionage agent to put down communism. So what you had in Germany, you had the rise of very fascist right-wing groups, and on the other hand, you had some very, very left-wing groups going into communism. So what you had in the country, it was very unstable. You had two extreme groups, right-wing and left-wing, which is not good for a country at all. He appeared shy and ill at ease in company, very, very shy. Without a uniform, things didn't work at all. And appeared listless and moody, in contrast to his dramatic and his effervescent speeches. If, again, as part of this, depending on how much you want to do, that's a map for you, it's actually quite interesting looking at his body language when he's delivering some of his speeches in the Second World War. Tells you a lot. He vacillates between conciliation, agreeing with people, to violent outbursts of temper, and moving right the way on to sections 3 and 4. That there is the couple of things there. Is conciliation and violent outbursts of temper. We need to start asking ourselves, was he a sociopath or was he a psychopath, or was there a mixture of both? And I'm going to get you to measure that. So really, Hitler, when he came to power, metaphorically tore up the Treaty of Versailles. But let's look at the psychological makeup of Hitler in his early years. Now, what I want to do is I've used, quite often if you get into someone else's territory, they use some words. And when I got into sort of academia, there was a lot of words that I had to, which I didn't understand, to look up. So let's just have a look psychologically. What sort of character was he? So he was what is known as a counteractive type, intense and stubborn efforts. Now, what does that mean? That means that when he was growing up, whatever things he experienced, he wanted to counteract them. So if he hated his father, he would be looking for, and these are just some examples, he would be looking for a stable figure. He had an extreme love for his mother, so he would be looking for someone else. If he did badly at school, he might then want to try and do well at something else. So he was a counteractive type. To overcome, as I've already discussed earlier, disabilities, weaknesses, humiliation, or self-esteem. So if you go back into your own past, you're going to have, sadly, something like this. Something would have happened in your past that you're either trying to suppress, you've forgotten, or what you're doing is you're taking action now to counteract what happened at the time. And I've put that into Reading. So the greening one that we go, let's just go back to overcome early disabilities. That's fine. But then it starts getting a bit dangerous there, is to revenge injuries and insults to pride. So there's a revenge element there. And this is achieved by one here called the ideal ego reaction formation. Okay, again, so it's got ideal and ego, two words there, which have been fused into one. Repression and denial of inferior parts of ego. So ego is our thoughts and processes. So it does not, let's just say with someone that has been, I don't know, physically assaulted by their father, as Hitler was, his stepfather, when he was a youngster. And that hurt, he was demeaned, he was embarrassed by it. What he might be doing is to try and repress what went on. And according to Freud, repression of this can lead to all sorts of problems in the future. And that's one of the reasons why he brought in psychoanalysis. And that is to be able to reconstruct what's happened before and put that into a good format so that person can deal with trauma, for instance, that went on when they were younger. The exact opposite of what he was. Superior, in Hitler's case, self-accomplishing, accomplishing once impossible feats, which will help in curing the wounds or weaknesses from when he was a lot younger. In Hitler's case, this was extreme, and we've gone through what those extremities were, is using the politics, right-wing politics, to fuel his hatred of Jews. It didn't necessarily have to be the hatred of Jews, but he used that as a vehicle to be able to garnish and harness the support of the German people at the time that he was, that the Nazis were voted into power. To lead to, and this is the dangerous bit, the need for dominance and superiority, aggression and revenge, repression of conscience, compliance, and love. You know, I would have loved to have got my hands on the diary. I think it was burnt, actually, I think it was burnt by the Soviets at the end of the Second World War, but I would have loved to have read the diary of Eva Braun, just to see what their relationship was like, because that would have told us a lot about Hitler. This is they're interesting. I thought I was going to set you some homework. This will help you digest the mind of Hitler. And Freud stated that our personality is made up of three elements. The first one is the desire, or the aggressive desire. He called it id. So the analogy that I've got on the right-hand side there is the id would say, I want to do that, it's something right now. Now, I've lost a considerable amount of weight in the last year, and I would ignore the ego and superego, just the id. So just forget the other two for a minute. And that is, I'm going to eat something right now, and to hell with the consequences. You then move on to the ego. So let's do this as a food thing. So the id says, I need to eat something right now. And the ego will then say, you can't do that because you're in the middle of an important meeting. So what the ego does, the ego comes along and says the opposite. Well, you can't do that because you're in the middle of a meeting. And what we do for criminal law, and let's take serial killers, if someone says they've just got they're concentrating on the id, I'm going to go and kill someone. In this country, in the UK, we have two things that stops that. The first one, there's no law, is your conscience, your ego. I'm not going to do that because it's wrong to do it. But if you do it, we then have the criminal law, and that's murder. We then have got the superego, which is like the moderator of the two. And the superego will say eating during an important meeting is rude and inappropriate, so it moderates them. This will really, if you read a bit further into this, and you can do that just straight off the net, look at id, ego, and superego. That will help you not only with this particular seminar or whatever this is, but it will also help you understand the minds of other serial killers or true crime characters that you're interested in. Let's just have a quick look at behaviour, and I love this. This is something I designed a number of years ago. Hitler's behaviour was a choice, unless he was mentally ill, and we're going to come to that. Behaviour can be measured, it can be seen, it can be moderated, and it can be counselled, yeah? So I'm behaving in a particular way, and you guys, as you're listening to this, unless you're mighty bored, which you could be, you are monitoring and making assessments about my behaviour. That is easy to do. But what psychoanalysts will do is they will look and they will go further beneath the surface. They want to look at beliefs, thoughts, feelings, and values. They're harder to see and harder to change. And then we go right the way to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And that is all to do with what our needs are. And it's a triangle. Again, this is worth looking at, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And right at the bottom of the triangle, our needs are is the ability to nourish our bodies, in other words, to eat. And right at the top of that pinnacle is called self-actualization. It's where you've arrived and you've achieved everything you want to. And I'm in that state now. I'm coming to not the terminal part, but the twilight of my working life, shall we say. And actually, because of how the police looked after me and what I've done, I'm enthusing young minds now through something else I do. And that to me, so I've arrived, but it's all of those things below the surface is what you need to find out as a psychologist. As a psychologist, or if you're looking at mental illness, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, so you need to go deeper. This is something here. I'm going to mention, this is one of my favourite psychologists, Carl Jung. And I'm going to bring in another aspect of the work that I do, and that is I own two companies, on not this one, but on the other side. What I try to do is I've designed a product called High Performing Teams, yeah? So the whole idea is to measure psychometrically how teams are performing, what their interaction is with each other, and then set a set of goals or circumstances so they can really perform well. So that can be in public service or in business. And this was done through Carl Jung, or certainly this colour theory, and I simply added to it. If you think of four colours and look at predominantly what you are, it's no good saying I am red, I am blue, I am green, I'm yellow, because that doesn't particularly work. You can be a mixture of all of them. But when you think red, you imagine fire, blood, heat. And then if you interchange those for work, for behaviours, those are things like assertive, risk-taking, hot-headed, strong-minded, actions orientated, and then you've got a profile there of a red character. I'm not going to go through all of them because I'm talking long enough now for you to have a look at these. But if we then go to the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got yellow, and you may see things like sun, brightness, and maybe gold. And then substitute these words for positive. We all know these people: smile, warm, and happy. Knowing all this as a police officer, the teams that I formed in the police service is I wanted a mixture of all of them. But what's interesting, I'm teaching you a bit of the theory of Carl Jung's colours here, is so that you can then start making judgments about your family, which is useful, people you work with, and friends and relatives. Because if there is a mismatch between your predominant colours and theirs, that can cause friction. So is what I do is, but there is a really good analogy here to criminals, crime, and most importantly, Adolf Hitler. So let's look on the left-hand side here on a good day. Yeah. So we see our different quadrants there. So on a good day, this is on a good day at work where there's no stress, anxiety, or depression. There's no pressure on that person. They will be competitive, demanding, determined, strong-willed, and purposeful. Nothing wrong with that at all. And sometimes different professions fit into that, like CEOs of companies. On the left-hand side, on a good day, where you see cautious, precise, deliberate, questioning, and formal, I think that goes to people like accountants, tax attorneys, and lawyers, for instance. So that's just a couple. And then you can go through, and then you're looking at the nursing profession, all the caring professions here, and then all sorts of other things. But let's shift to a bad day. So you've woken up on the wrong side of the bed. This is where it then can lead to. Now, I don't mind sharing with you, the last time I measured myself, I was a mixture of the two on a good day. This here is, I suppose, because up until the lockdown, I had a very, very big team to lead, and I needed a lot of these things here. But on a bad day at work, look what it can lead to: aggressiveness, controlling, driving, overbearing, intolerant, stuffy, indecisive, suspicious, cold, and reserved. Knowing myself through this, I was able to use this. And you could see here, Hitler's personality was definitely red, very, very dominated by red. And you can see where this leads to. So we're kind of getting into another arena or an area here where we're bringing in Carl Jung, who I believe actually was Austrian, from the same country as Hitler. And of course, then it goes into this spectrum. And people are measured on different parts of the spectrum. And right in the middle, and I've got right in the middle there, where it says actually it's got spectrum, it's a mixture of all of them. One of my big heroes is Mother Teresa of Calcutta. And that woman, that angel who was able to flex to get into all sorts of different arenas. She was in war arenas where she was trying to deal with the soldiers. She was loving, she was caring, and everything else. And where she needed to be assertive, she was, but a really interesting character. So we all fall somewhere on this. Yeah, that is personalities, colours, and we have a way of measuring this. And when we do this with companies, we've got this product, as I say, called High Performing Team. We actually go through all of these, and with the consent of everyone, everyone on the team or in the business or the company or division share it. Let's look at the book that he wrote. What was this telling us? Mein Kampf, yeah, my struggle. And I think it was almost like a capital offence during the Second World War not to have a copy of this. It was very, very popular indeed. There were 2 volumes, one published in 1925 and one in 1927, so nearly 100 years old. By 1939, over 5 million copies had been sold in 11 languages. But actually, the production of this book and reading it, not just for reading's sake, tells you a lot about Adolf Hitler. Volume was about revenge, racist ideology in it, and that is obviously to do with the Jews, Slavs, black people. He wanted more living space, and I touched on that earlier. He wanted revenge against France. He saw the problem of the First World War being against the French, and you can imagine, well, there's a very interesting video of Hitler's delight when you can see him on holiday in Paris after they had successfully gone into France and defeated the French in the Second World War. His second volume was about the National Socialist Party, and that's always been of interest to me. It's called the Socialist Party, the National Socialist Party, yet they're extremely right-wing. But there we go. He outlined his political programme and the terror methods that they're going to use, but it was riddled with spelling and grammatical errors. Well, does that matter? Well, probably not, but in that sort of book, it's actually showing the type of person he is. He was very appealing to dissatisfied elements of the German people. It's still popular even today with neo-Nazis. In other words, it will be distributed and read by people that are on the right wing of political spectra. Messiah complex, what's this all about? So in 1942, this guy called Joseph McCurdy analysed a speech given by Hitler on the 26th of April, and he was part of British wartime intelligence. This was a really, really sensible thing to do. Just to give you an insight, it's really interesting to go, there is a thing called the flesh test, and what the flesh test will do is you can look through documents. So let's just say blackmail notes, for instance. And over time, if you look at the length of the sentence, the length of the word, the length of the paragraph, and the vocabulary used, you can work out the intelligence of that person. It's called the flesh test, FLESCH. So if you want to further anything I'm saying, you can have a look at that, and over time that can help. This is what he found. He found, and with a lot of these demagogues, and if you look at Idi Amin from Uganda, which is a country that I love and I've visited a few times, you look at Joe Stalin, you look at a lot of these dictators, they all start getting a growing paranoia because there's people, if you're in a dictatorship, that will want to come and assassinate you. They had a Messiah complex, and this is the heart of the matter, believing he was leading a chosen people on a crusade against an evil incarnate in the Jews. So you've almost got like a situation there where you've got Moses leading the Israeli people trying to find the promised land here. Hitler now saw them, this is the Jews, not just as a threat to Germany, but as a universal diabolical agency. It was caught up in a web of religious delusions, and that's exactly what they were. And this is what McCurdy says finally. The Jews, this is what Hitler believed. The Jews are the incarnation of evil, while he is the incarnation of the spirit of good. He is a God by whose sacrifice victory over evil may be achieved. He doesn't say this in so many words, but such a system of ideas would rationalize what he does say that is otherwise obscure. And this is what Hitler said at this address to the Reichstag, their parliament. I, for my part, acknowledge another precept which says that man must deal the final blow to those whose downfall is destined by God. And I think that that statement there is big style, showing what his state of mind was in 1942. Sorry, I'm thinking here because I'm thinking what I'm trying to do is to pack as much as possible in. And what I'm trying to do is to get some interesting offshoots for you to look at. There is a classic piece of psychology, and it's called obedience to authority. And it goes back to a classic experiment done by a guy called Stanley Milgram in the 60s. Milgram's parents, if I understand this correctly, were actually Holocaust survivors. And what Milgram wanted to do was to see what people were prepared to do. And the analogy is to the laudable German soldiers during the Second World War. What is it that trips them over to being in a position where they were desensitized and prepared to kill fellow men, i.e. Jews, in that sort of volume? So it's called Obedience to Authority. It's Stanley Milgram, the experiment. Do have a look at that. That will give you some explanation as to why not only Hitler, but a lot of German soldiers that were probably quite good men before the war actually got involved in some of the stuff we're talking about. See here at different times there that he is, I would even go as far to suggest that these are Time magazines, 1931, 1936, 1941. He was very, very popular. And in 1936, you probably know, just 3 years before the Second World War, that the Olympic Games were held in Berlin. And Hitler was clever enough to be able to mask all the anti-Semitism that was going on. And it was so deceptive that it left a lot of other world leaders saying, what is the problem? But we know that he was masking a lot of that. So he was very, very popular. So this is looking at popularity, intrigue, and what the Lancet said. You know, as a medical journal, and there was a debate in the Lancet. Hitler's behaviour was so extreme, despite him seeming rational political goals, that his sanity was questioned by many, including psychiatrists. Attempt to understand his mental health started in 1933, when he acceded to power as Chancellor of Germany. In 1933, this guy here, Johann Schaffenberg, a Norwegian psychiatrist, diagnosed Hitler in 1933 as a destructive, paranoid prophet. When the Nazis occupied Norway, they threw this chap that made that statement into prison. And then we come back with one of my favourite psychologists and psychiatrists, Carl Jung. I apologise though, I thought it was Austrian. He's Swiss, sorry. He found him sexless and inhuman, with a single purpose of establishing the Third Reich to overcome all Hitler's perceived threats and previous insults to Germany's history at any cost. William Brown was an accomplished neurologist, later psychotherapist. And in the Times in 1939, at the time that we declared war on Germany, he wrote in the Times, every symptom of paranoic who is suffering from persecutory mania and whose brainstorms and megalomania will increase until his madness is so apparent that he must be isolated. His Messiah identification with Frederick the Great and Napoleon made him appear to be a nativistic, a throwback to more primitive times, monster. That says it all, and that was in 1939. So there's no secret there that Hitler was was suffering from mental illnesses, and we're going to look at what sort of mental illnesses in parts 3 and 4. I hope you're all with me, guys. This is quite long, but I've done a lot of research into that, as you can probably tell. So in Freudian terms, his latent homosexuality had been repressed. So there was no way Hitler gave himself out as this messianic character that was going to lead Germany into the promised land. And he had to be seen. Just imagine if he'd been seen as a homosexual, that would not have worked, because he actually was loved by many German women, for instance. So he had to have this particular imprint of himself. So I think he had homosexual tendencies, from what I've read, and these were repressed, producing self-love and self-love of Germany. This is Freudian terms, and I have to say, as a psychologist and a scientist, I work on evidence, and this is just some of the musings here about what Freud would say. We've spoken about Walter Langer, psychoanalyst. Look at him later. In 1943, was commissioned by the Office of Strategic Services. There was spying within that unit to write a review on Hitler. And that was published 30 years later as The Mind of Adolf Hitler. Langer predicted suicide as the most plausible outcome. Langer declared that Hitler's behaviour was evidence of a weakling masquerading as a bully. We've all seen these sort of people. And failure in the future role of Führer, who was probably a neurotic psychopath bordering on schizophrenia. And as I've said very proudly and very excitedly, I've got Langer's book that all you guys can access. So that is that's the first half, or the first hour gone. I've completely lost track of time, which is not a bad thing. But let's, so you can have a break now, you can walk away, have a cup of coffee, you can turn this off, you can forget it. But let's look at these secret wartime reports. I think in my childlike mentality, when you see the word secret, it's exciting. And I've got to say here, a big thanks to the archivists at Cambridge University, because when I heard that some of these secret wartime reports were available to the public during the dark days of the lockdown, as I rung up the Cambridge Uni, the archivist, and to my surprise, they answered the phone because they'd had it switched through. And I said, look, after the lockdown, can I come and pick up some of these things? And the guy said to me, no. He said, I'll email them to you. And within half an hour, I'd had these golden nuggets arrive on my desk, which I'm now able to talk to you about right this minute. Secret wartime report. What we've got a pack of these. And why are they important when it comes to true crime? Because it gives us an assessment around the type of person that we're dealing with. And later, and more familiarly speaking, this goes on to offender profiling. You're going to have to forgive me for 1 second because I'm in my studio at the moment. I'm not going to carry on talking, but one of the things you'll hear, this will amuse you, totally unprofessional. I need a drink, so just give me 1 minute and I'm going to get a drink and I'll carry on talking to you in 1 second. So these are some of the players and the texts that we're going to look at. Historically, they're interesting, but I'm going to try and stick to the psychological aspects. So this guy here, Professor Henry Murray, is a psychologist and he's a lieutenant colonel in the Office of Strategic Services during the World War II. From what I've read about this character here, Mr. Murray, Lieutenant Colonel Professor Murray, he was a larger-than-life character and really wanted to get things done. So he produced a 240-page report predicting Hitler's behaviour and how to deal with him after World War II. This was in October 1943. So one wonders what would have happened if Hitler had been caught alive. What would have been the best thing to do with him? We've spoken about Walter Langer, and he was in the Office of Strategic Services as a civilian. He harvested a huge amount of material, later called the Hitler source book, around about the same time, April 1943. And then we've got our own people here from the United Kingdom, Mark Abrahams and McCurdy from the BBC's Overseas Propaganda Unit and the Psychological Warfare Branch. Do you know what, guys? I would have loved to have been in that Psychological Warfare Branch, maybe putting in misinformation and that sort of thing. That would have been my contribution. They produced a report based on the speech, which we've touched that. So these are the reports, and all of these are open to you for further reading in case you're interested. So I've also looked at some other analysis by data supplied by the Office of Services. I've looked at Mein Kampf, another book by Hitler called My New Order, book on Hitler, Voice of Destruction, Germany Possessed, and a huge amount of material. So I've been all over this stuff to make some of the comments. What Henry Murray came up with, Professor and Colonel, 140-page, which I'm not going to go through. You'll be happy to know. But let's summarise his findings. Megalomaniac, delusional about his own power. He was divinely appointed. When I was appointed as a detective chief inspector at Scotland Yard, I was appointed by a board and not divinely appointed. He suffered with what was known as war neurosis and hysterical blindness at the conclusion of World War I. And we know he had nothing to do, nowhere to go. Sexual relationships as something exceedingly filthy. So, which makes me think, if he thought that, what had gone on in his past, or as we've discussed, what was he trying to repress? Immeasurable hatred traced back to his experiences as a child, where he was insulted, humiliated, and wounded pride. Look, let's be clear about this. This can often happen, and this will have happened to a number of people that I'm speaking to at the moment, going back to your childhood. But it doesn't necessarily follow that in adulthood you're going to go on to commit crimes. And that's the same of serial killers. And I always give the example of Ted Bundy and Harold Shipman. They were both brought up in an extremely loving atmosphere, yet both went on to be serial killers. Compulsion, there was always a push for war or individual criminality, paranoid symptoms, schizophrenia, hypersensitive, anxiety, panics of anxiety, jealousy, delusions of persecution, delusions of omnipotence. In other words, I'm in charge and only me, and messiahship. So those are Murray's observations. Really interesting. After oratory, there is no doubt about it that Adolf Hitler was one of the world's greatest orators in his speeches. He was well prepared, but where those speeches derive from and how he was taught is again very, very interesting. Hitler took lessons from this chap here called Eric Jan Hannesson, a mind reader and an occultist, in the importance of staging meetings to obtain the greatest dramatic effect. And what's quite interesting, if you look at Hitler's cabinet or the people around him, there was one or two, including Rudolf Hess, the deputy Führer, who were big style into the occult, which is quite weird for a cabinet that is trying to conquer the world. They're actually interested in the occult. He seduced crowds with eloquence, getting them to accept he was divinely appointed. And there was someone, in fact, what would we call it today? There was someone that looked after his image. Yeah, an image coach, if you like, or appearance, because his appearance was, and again, there's nothing wrong with this, his appearance was as a German from Munich, wearing that sort of uniform or apparel or garb. Whereas once he started getting the ability to get away from beer halls to talk, he had a style guru, that's the right word, to start looking at the way he dressed. Compelled industrialists and politicians to fall into line also, mainly through fear. And we have this ongoing problem that Hugo Boss, the clothing company, were complicit with the Nazis during the Second World War to produce German uniforms, often from hair that had come from, as a result of the Holocaust, from some of the death camps. But, you know, there was lots of other companies that are still about now. But what would have happened if they hadn't fallen into line? There were two separate secret war reports on the psychology. Hitler saying he's exhibiting shamanism. This is the exploitation of hysterical symptoms by which the shaman gets to a pitch where he believes he's transmitting messages from the spirits. But if you look at how the people were receiving his speeches, this is exactly what was going on. He must have had help on his speeches, because if you look at Mein Kampf, it was riddled with spelling errors. He wasn't intelligent enough, he was never intelligent enough to produce such eloquence. See, you must be thinking, what on earth is he going to talk about now? He was obsessed with fertility and eugenics, gene pools, getting the right gene pools, if you like. This was probably part of his counteractive type, given his family composition and roots. So he was really interested in, you know, the ideal Aryan German. Murray is the breeding ground for warriors and multiplication of the German race. He openly encouraged his troops to have children with the Norwegians, who he saw as pure. As evidence points to the fact that Hitler himself was impotent. The evidence comes from former acquaintances where background material was being taught. That was by Langer. He was able to speak to one or two of Hitler's previous cabinet that had left Germany. It's strongly suspected that he was unable to consummate a sexual relationship. He's compelled to compensate by exhibiting unsurpassed power before other men. A couple of things to think about there. Is what I call the mental continuum. And we all have these. So bearing in mind, he came from what I call a standing start. We all have mood swings. Maybe don't. I certainly do. And we all have an element of creativity in us. There is no doubt at all that Adolf Hitler was quite a talented painter. But I don't think he was part of the sort of traditional schools of painting at the time. But look at some of these here, standing star. Success, that's where he starts off from. Let's look at that again. A complete success. Well, it wasn't, not when he started off with the Munich beer hall pushed. That was unsuccessful. But he was successful in a lot of things that he did. The speed with which he conquered some of the countries, right the way through to mood swings, total confidence, right the way through to the other thing, or mental and physical collapse. I've looked again in preparation for this talk. I've looked at some of the videos of Hitler on his last days, and he's actually congratulating soldiers. But these soldiers are boys, they're young children. And I suppose they've had no other choice because a lot of the army's been wiped out. And you can see that Hitler's actually holding his right hand because it's moving involuntarily up and down, and maybe he's got some sort of neurological disease, Parkinson's, something like that. You see, he was an aspiring romantic artist, an architect, and some of that I saw in Berlin is still present. Some of his architecture, beautiful to be honest, quite mechanized, quite conformed, cubism, but something that's of interest to me, right the way through to the creation of the Nazi Party and the annihilation of the Jews. What I find quite interesting, I don't know whether you're aware of this, that not once did Hitler go to an extermination camp. It's even doubtful that he was present at the meeting that was called by a guy called Heinrich, one of Himmler's deputies, or Hitler's deputy, Himmler's deputy for the final solution. What values did Hitler have? What is underneath that line of the iceberg? What's under the sea? His high valuation, which is not a problem with it, is power, glory, dictatorship, nationalism, militarism, or what he put high values on: power, glory, dictatorship, nationalism, militarism, and brutalism. This is what he didn't value: weakness. We know as a child he was weak. Indecision. We know that he was indecisive. We know that his low valuation was tolerance, no compassion. Definitely didn't want peace. He didn't want rational debate or a democracy. And when we look at some of the variables of psychopathy and sociopaths, we'll see some of these low valuations being teased out. Populism, which he hated in Russia. And the things that he didn't like was materialism and capitalism. Those were the two things that he didn't like. We then come to Walter Lange, and he was a psychoanalyst who worked with the OSS as a civilian during the Second World War. He harvested a huge amount of material later called the Hitler Source Book. And I'm going to point to signpost to you guys where you can get a copy of that book. And this is what Lange said: people will believe a big lie sooner than a little one, and if you repeat it frequently enough, people will sooner or later believe it. It's what I consider his amazing work. He was born in 1896, son of German immigrants. In 1935, he studied under Anna Freud, the daughter of Sigmund, in Vienna. If you get the opportunity, I actually went to Freud's house, which is coterminous to his surgery, and I had the opportunity of having a wander around both. So if you are in Vienna, it's a really good 2 or 3 hours out. He grew up an earlier version. He wouldn't have known it at the time of an offender profile, which is so important in today's criminal investigation. You know, we get to the point, I've done offender profiling with you guys before. I'm going to repeat it next year in 2024, and you'll get the opportunity to do an offender profile on Jack the Ripper. As for his predictions and his work, his papers were kept secret for use during the Cold War. And I can't remember whether I put it in a lot. No, I didn't put it in. And the reason why it was kept secret is because President J.F. Kennedy was given this work, and he caused the application of Lange's work on Khrushchev, who was the president of Russia at the time, or the Soviet Union. So this is why this work was kept secret, because it was used on other politicians, and it was very, very successful. So I volunteered to work for the Office of Strategic Services under this guy there called Colonel Wild Bill Donovan. And again, he was a very effervescent, larger-than-life character. And he personally interviews, why is this important? This is really important, Otto Strasser in Montreal. Now, Strasser had been an early part of Hitler's inner sanctum. So this was very, very useful for Langer to be able to have a chat and interview Strasser. And a little known fact, in 1938, this man here, Langer, helped many Jewish scientists and anti-Nazis to obtain visas to the United States. And he personally transports groups of refugees to the Swiss border. So this guy's got a dual role there. Not only is he saving people from death, he's also an amazing psychoanalyst. So there were 4 parts to it. This is part 1, as what Hitler believed himself to be. What did he think he was? As the German people knew him, as his associates knew him, and as he knows himself. So those were the 4 aspects to it. I find it very interesting to look at this is going off the subject a bit, the relationship between Hitler and his other people that are in his cabinet. Very, very interesting, because they're all sycophants. They're all worried about Hitler turning on them. They're all in the business of doing damage to each other, so they curry favour with the Führer. Last bit there, psychological analysis and reconstruction, and his probable behaviour in the future. So all of this you can read in the book. And we're going to home in on part 6. The Langer later suggests, and you can see there reading, that he's dead, Hitler's dead, suicide is the most likely outcome. Psychopathic behaviour manifests this outcome as the Superman role. He previously confided, yes, in the hour of extreme peril, I must sacrifice myself for the people. That's going back to this messianic, or this messiah complex, where Jesus died to sacrifice himself for the whole world. Seen as a route to immortality, you can see that. He thought, didn't he, that the German people, the Nazis, would laud him and beatify him for time immemorial, which is simply not the case. Why were the papers kept secret for so long? Methodology was so good, it was used time and time again by different politicians post-war to examine their political opponents. We will see some examples in the 4th section. So what I like about being a psychologist is that, you know, you're not rude, or you don't shout or unkind to people, but it's good to have criticism and critique of each other's work. So the primary and secondary resources give us an excellent overview into the insight of the mind of Hitler. I think that's good. The psychoanalysis to function correctly is highly desirable, if not essential, for the subject, and in this case Hitler, to be present in a one-to-one situation, which was never going to happen. The assertion can be given no credible basis. Some were made to disadvantage the Nazis and were part of psychological warfare. So some of the stuff that we might be interested that were put out were probably given to sort of break down the morale of the Nazis at the time. A word. Survey of all the evidence points to Hitler believing himself to be immortal, chosen by God to be the new deliverer of Germany and the founder of a new social order for the world. Harold Smith says, I was convinced that of all the millions on whom the Hitler myth had fastened itself, the most carried away was Adolf Hitler. himself. So, my friends, that is it. Sorry you've heard my voice, but I for one, find this a fascinating subject as to who Hitler was. I think the best is yet to come. Do have a look through some of the things that I've suggested. Do have a look at that. So in the next session, we're going to have a look at this. Going completely off the subject, what I have coming up in the fast lane in London at the Star Tavern in Belgravia, this is where the Great Train Robbery of 1963 was planned. It's the 60th anniversary coming up on the 8th of August. And I'm doing 3 events, one each day, called the Great Train Robbery Experience. And you'll have an opportunity to have a look at that, conduct some of the forensic tests. It's over 2 hours on the 6th, 7th and 8th. If you are interested, just simply go to crimelive.co.uk and you'll see all of our events on there. Let's just stop sharing this, and finally, just to say, as always, thank you so much for giving up your time. I've really enjoyed delivering this. I'll be interested to see what your feedback is like. This is going to be uploaded to YouTube, and if you could give me some feedback on that, that would be good. And I look forward to delivering part 3 and part 4 in exactly 1 month's time. Look after yourselves. If you're going on holiday, enjoy that. If you've got children, I hope you've got plenty to do during the summer holidays. Look after yourselves, and I will see you in 1 month's time. Goodbye.